The Senate Committee on Natural Resources will now come to order. Will the Secretary please call roll?
Senator Flores. Present. Senator Goycochea. Here. Senator Hansen. Here. Senator Pizzina. Present. Senator Scheibel. Here.
Thank you so much. Please note we do have a quorum with all 5 present. Before we begin, we'll go over just a few housekeeping reminders. Please do silence your cell phones and electronic devices. Otherwise, Senator Goycochea will be coming down to answer your calls for the remainder of the day. The public is advised that during meetings, legislators and staff are using laptops to view bills and exhibits and not for personal reasons. We're trying to be as paper-free as possible, so please don't look at this as a sign of inattention or disrespect. Please note that we require everyone to submit exhibits in an electronic format the day before the meeting. A few reminders about testifying before the committee. Please sign in at the table by the door. Give the committee secretary your business card if you have one prior to testifying. And even if you're not testifying, you may want to sign in so that there's a record of who's interested in a particular bill in case the committee needs to contact you at a later date. When testifying, please turn on the microphone and clearly state and spell your name and share your affiliation, if any, for the record. Then turn the microphone off each time that you finish speaking. If you have handouts for the committee, we ask that you provide 10 hard copies to the committee secretary for use by the public. We will be taking public comment at the end of each meeting, and a reminder that public comment should not have anything to do with either AB 70 or AB 387. We'll be taking testimony in support, opposition, and neutral during the hearings. We'll be limiting public comment to 2 minutes per person to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak. Please feel free to provide any additional comments in writing to the committee secretary so that they may be added to the record. Today we do have 2 bills that we're hearing, AB 70 and AB 387. And we are going to go ahead and get started and now open with bill number AB 70. So we'll go ahead and open the hearing, and please get started when you're ready, Assemblyman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. For the record, my name is Howard Watts, and I represent Assembly District 15 in Clark County. And it's my pleasure to present what I certainly hope is the less time-consuming of the 2 bills up for consideration today. Assembly Bill 70. AB 70 was one of the bills that came out of the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Natural Resources, which I served as chair of. Some very quick background on this. This relates to a $3 fee that is collected on big game tag applications, and that has primarily been used for the management of predators, including the lethal removal of predators. I think it's fair to say has been paid by sportsmen under the concept that predator management and removal is for the benefit of the big game species that sportsmen are pursuing. There exists in statute currently a requirement of how the proceeds of that fee are to be spent. The bill in its original form proposed to eliminate that and provide the Department of Wildlife with the discretion to allocate that how they see fit. There are very passionate opinions on multiple perspectives when it comes to this issue and how what is felt would be is the appropriate management tactic for predators, what is of the greatest benefit to big game species. And so in conversation and consideration of all those voices and the concerns that were raised, understanding that some folks want to see 100% of those dollars go to lethal removal and bringing predators off the landscape that are impacting game populations. And other folks want to see that go to habitat improvement, restoration, and other projects that they might feel are of even greater benefit to wildlife. And I think the honest truth is it depends. It's situational based on many, many different factors. And so before you, in its first reprint, AB 70 essentially proposes that the sportsman can choose at the time that they are applying for these tags. They can direct their $3 fee either towards lethal removal, in which case 100% of that $3 would go towards lethal removal of predators, or towards other programs for the benefit of game species. And I have provided an amendment. Really, the intent of the amendment is just to try and align some of the language between the two. So, Section 1, subsection 1, A is essentially it's that program for the lethal removal of predatory wildlife. B, with the proposed amendment, would be developing an annual program to provide for habitat improvement and research or management beneficial to non-predatory game species. So it really is just intended as a little bit of a language cleanup and alignment between the two options. That is where things stand. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Assemblyman Watts. Do we have any questions from the committee? Vice Chair Scheibel.
So I sat on the interim committee, and I appreciate that, this has been a long, hard road to get to any kind of compromise on this bill. Realistically, are we going to be rerouting any money to the habitat improvement programs, or is everybody going to elect to continue to put their $3 towards lethal management?
Thank you for that question, Senator. Howard Watts for the record. I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't answer for sure. I know I just put in my applications, and so I'll go ahead and put on the record that I would dedicate my money towards the habitat program. I think there are others who will do the same. Now, at the end of the day, where are we going to end up? I don't know. As we know, just who is vocal on an issue doesn't always reflect the total universe of people, and so we could end up with it still being 80-20. It could be 90-10. It could be 50-50. We won't know until we give it a try and see what the results of that are. But again, I think this was, and again, not my original idea, but I think this gave some peace of mind in opening up that flexibility for folks to, first of all, just kind of evaluate those options on their own, and then to really have full control over what's happening with the dollars that they're putting forward, and and moving them one way or the other, instead of either the department, which on this particular issue, there are again folks with very different perspectives who disagree with if we give them authority, even though I believe they're the experts and we should allow them to make those decisions. There's people that don't like the decisions they come to, and so having a target in statute, while not necessarily scientific, it provides a degree of certainty. So that was the compromise, is to provide the degree of certainty right to the sportsmen of knowing that their individual funds are going to be dedicated towards one option or another.
Senator Gocochea.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Assemblyman Watts. This might be better for, I assume someone will be coming up from NDOW, but we're going to be checking the box, I assume, whether you want it to go to habitat or lethal control. But clearly NDOW isn't going to reject a tag because you failed to check the box. So again, how are they going to deal with that? Or will they reject the application because they failed to direct a $3 fee, or 50-50? If they're unchecked, half goes each way? I'm just curious how that's going to work.
Thank you for that question, Senator. Howard Watts for the record. And I think if NDOW wants to come up in neutral perhaps and just correct me if I misspeak, but I know that there's check boxes and where you can pick one, more than one, or none, and there's also options where you have to pick only one thing. I'm hopeful that we can easily get that implemented in a way where, in order for it to move forward, you got to pick one or the other.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Hansen, you never have questions. I'm surprised.
Actually, an answer, I think, to that question, when you do the application, you can't finalize it until you've checked off every box. So I would imagine you're going to have to make a choice one way or the other. No, that is an interesting bill. I completely support it with the amendment. In fact, I'd like it I was trying to get the fee up. You know, this goes back to when Jerry Claiborne was chair, a guy named Cecil Freddy out of Vegas had Hunters Alert, had Gerald Lant and a bunch of them, and I was involved. I remember helping get this bill passed. It's been at least 20 years, I think, since that happened. So, and I don't think that fee's been raised since, but I don't want to bring that up now, maybe next session. But the concept of what you're trying to do, I think it's a good compromise. I really do. And, you know, I think, especially in light of this winter, I'm looking forward to hearing Director Janae's comments on the flights. I just read some of the BLM flights on the wild horses, and it's been a disaster winter-wise. Now, the irony in that is the predators don't go down proportionally because as those animals die, they actually provide food for the predator populations. You're going to end up with a real disproportionate number, high number of predators versus a shrinking number of prey, deer, antelope, bighorn sheep, and so forth. So it's, I think this will be a year where they really are going to need some lethal fees, but there are going to be people who think completely different than I do and more like you on this issue, frankly. And I think to answer the number of people that will actually check the box, be very interesting to have this discussion in a couple of years and see how that did break out. So, but I want you to know I support the amended version, and thank you for working with so many different parties. I know it's been a real struggle. So,
Thank you, Senator. Howard Watts for the record. I appreciate that. I appreciate those comments. And I would just say my perspective is that, again, objectively, these are really complex issues. We need some level of all of the above. There are definitely benefits to targeted lethal removal of predators. Certainly benefits from that. Certainly benefits from making sure that we are maintaining proper habitat. But yes, winter, all kinds of variables have an impact on these wildlife populations, certainly. And so I do hope that this provides some flexibility to take on those various management needs for the benefit of our wildlife populations. And I agree it'll be interesting to see the data as it comes in, and future legislatures can make future considerations from there.
very good. Well, I salute you for working so aggressively with both parties to try to come to what I think is a very reasonable compromise. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
All right, any more questions? All right, seeing no further questions from the committee, thank you so much for the very thorough presentation. We'll have you step back, and we are ready to welcome those who'd like to give testimony in support of Assembly Bill 70. Please come on up to the table, and thank you.
Hi there. I have allergies, so I'm going to make mine short and apologize. This is BB Adams, and I represent Friends of Nevada Wildlife. And someone should get a picture of me and Larry Johnson at the same table, agreeing on something today. Anyway, so I'm going to paraphrase, but you guys will get my entire testimony. Anyway, the statement is offered in support of AB 70 as amended, removing the 80% lethal mandate and replacing it with a checkoff system, allowing tag applicants a choice as to how their mandatory $3 fee is to be spent. Lethal predator control or habitat improvement and research to benefit game species. The latter choice, by the way, would allow a 3-to-1 match with federal dollars. So it's even more than the $3 per person. And that's where I'm going to stop right now because I can't talk.
Thank you very much, Ms. Adams, and please get that testimony into our secretary so we can read it later. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera-Georgeson, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Nevada Conservation League. We're here in support of AB 70, giving more money to management activities that provide the greatest benefit for wildlife and habitat. Seems like a win to us, so we urge the committee support. Thank you.
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you. My name is Larry Johnson. I'm president of the Coalition for Nevada's Wildlife, and here to support AB 70 as amended, and we want to personally thank Assemblyman Watts for working with us and coming up with the amendment that I think is very appropriate. Thank you.
Wonderful. 3 people we don't always see at the table together, so a great start to our meeting for AB 70. Do we have anyone else who'd like to come up in support for Assembly Bill 70? BPS, do we have anyone on the phones?
If you would like to testify in support of AB 70, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Chair Pazina and members of the committee, my name is Barry Levinson, B-A-R-I-L-E-V-I-N-S-O-N, a volunteer member of the Sierra Club's Legislative Committee. On behalf of the club and our more than 30,000 members and supporters statewide, I'm speaking in support of AB 70. Currently, the $3 hunting tab game fee collects about $1 million each year in an attempt to increase the number of deer, sage grouse, and bighorn sheep. By current law, 80% of this fee has to be used to lethally remove predators, including coyotes, ravens, and mountain lions. This is required whether or not these predators are the cause of population declines of the game animals. Sierra Club supports AB 70 as amended because the lethal mandate is not necessary and can be harmful. We should allow NDOW the flexibility for biologists to use the most scientifically proven methods to protect the game species, along with the predators and all of their ecosystems. This may include the use of guzzlers, feeding sagebrush or other habitat-enhancing programs to increase deer, sage grouse, and bighorn sheep populations. Of note, since the 80% lethal mandate has been in place, deer and sage grouse populations remain in steep decline. So obviously the current program is ineffective and only serves to remove predators that our ecosystems depend on for balance. Coyotes, for example, are essential in controlling rodent populations. We understand that this bill will allow hunters to choose how their $3 game tag fee will be spent, either on lethal predator activities or on protection of the game animals and their habitats. We hope and trust that the hunters will make their choices based on their own research or upon the recommendations of experts, such as those at NDOW. When this bill is enacted, we strongly encourage the education of hunters to make good choices to preserve not only the game species, but the entire ecosystem. We do urge the support of AB 70. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Broadcast, anyone else in support on AB 70?
There are no callers choosing to testify at this time.
All right. With that, we'll close testimony for support on AB 70 and open testimony in opposition. Anyone in opposition, please come forward to the table. BPS, anyone on the phones in opposition for AB 70?
If you would like to testify in opposition to AB 70, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. The public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
All right. We'll close testimony in opposition and move to neutral. I think we might have someone coming up, Director Janae maybe, to speak in, nope, okay. So we have no one coming up to speak in neutral. Do we have anyone on the phone lines? BPS, and thank you.
If you would like to testify in neutral for AB 70, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. The public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
All right. Thank you so much. So it looks like not everyone in this room was here to talk about AB 70 then. All right. With that, Assemblyman Watts, would you like to come up and make some closing statements on? Okay. So we will close the hearing then on AB 70 and we will open the hearing on AB 387, revising provisions relating to water. Get started when you're ready, and thank you, Assemblyman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, for the record, Howard Watts, representing Assembly District 15 in Clark County. Thank you for your consideration of Assembly Bill 387 today. I want to give a little bit of background on how this came forward. This was another recommendation that came out of the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Natural Resources. So I want to speak a little bit to kind of the high level of the genesis of the bill, some of the things that we're trying to address, and kind of acknowledge the conversations and where things stand, and then I will very kind of briefly walk through some of the provisions of the bill, and then glad to answer any questions that you have. So One of the primary events that led to the creation of this was conversations during the last interim about our statutes for water management, and also the potential implications of a court case from a Clark County District Court in regards to decisions that were made by the state engineer. There were many issues involved. It was a very complex filing. It involved multiple groundwater basins. It involved connections between groundwater and surface water, and a lot of hearings and processes and decision making made by the state engineer. And so there were a range of issues from those related to due process, but really what caught my attention and the committee's attention and interest were some of the things it brought to light around our statutes. One of them, it said that there was a legislative declaration encouraging the state engineer to use the best available science in decision making, but nothing actually in statute clearly directing the state engineer to do so. Now, the state has been constantly using science in its decision making, and so it may seem counterintuitive of what else would be involved in making those decisions, but you'll probably hear even the definition. How do you define it? Trying to define any term in water law is a very difficult enterprise, and we have a range of just very different and complex dynamics as you move from one area to another in terms of hydrological science. But one of the clear things that was put forth is that a legislative declaration doesn't provide the authority that a statute does. It might express kind of our interests. It might provide a little bit of direction on how statutes are executed, but they are not statute themselves. And as we've had conversations in the past in this body about things like the use of the best available science in decision making, or about the conjunctive management of our groundwater and surface water, which legally are separated. They're in different chapters. Surface water was developed much earlier than groundwater. We now know with hydrological science that there is connections, that groundwater pumping near surface water can actually pull on those surface water flows. We know that groundwater springs are a type of groundwater discharge that then becomes surface water. So there's a lot of interactions in reality, but legally they're quite separate. And so when we tried to figure out how can we start to address that at the state level, we couldn't agree on anything, and so we put something in legislative declaration. And that was called out as not actually providing the authority for the state to do those things. And then finally, questions were raised about the ability to manage, potentially combine groundwater basins for management purposes if it's determined that there are hydrologic connections, that water flows through and across multiple basins, figuring out how we manage our existing water law and standards such as putting water to beneficial use and honoring prior appropriation, but understanding that that can get complicated if the water is actually, we manage on a basin by basin approach, but if that water is actually flowing into another basin, you may have conflicts arising that have to be addressed outside of just the seniority of one basin. So those were kind of the key elements that we looked to address and see if we could clarify some of these provisions. And I wanted to be clear that the goal of this was not to direct the ultimate outcome of that piece of litigation. It's currently on appeal at the state Supreme Court. So the goal is not to influence the state Supreme Court's decision. I, for one, would be fine with whatever that court finds, but wanted to make sure that if they did agree in entirety with the district court, that would actually reduce some of the some of the authorities and management actions that the state engineer has been exercising. And so we felt it was important to try and clarify, particularly again where we already have these things in Nevada revised statute, but as legislative declarations and not actually within our statutes governing how water is managed. So that's what the initial task was that we set out to accomplish. There's been a lot of conversations. You can see pretty much every water stakeholder in the state, I think, is probably in the room or on the phones right now, unless they're somehow otherwise occupied. Convened a large stakeholder group to talk through some of these things, solicited feedback. There have been ongoing conversations. Some of them I've participated in, some of them have gone on kind of ad hoc to try and figure out how we address these things and try and hone these concepts in to make sure that it isn't a broad expansion of power, and that we're trying to figure out something that provides a bit of clarity, provides some more certainty, and trying to reduce concern. And so that's what led us to the bill as it stands today. I do want to note we've had continuing conversations. One of the big sticking points right now, I think, is around the combination of groundwater basins and managing them. You'll probably hear as testimony goes on about super basins. So combining multiple individual basins and essentially managing them really as one basin. There was, during a special session, statute was passed that actually designated a super basin, I believe around Apex. The decision by the state engineer that got challenged also was combining basins. And so there's been a lot of concern that is the focus or intent of the bill, and there's just a lot of concern about that practice and that authority generally. And so we've been having conversations to see how can we really focus this in on breaking down the legal fiction and addressing conflicts, because we know that they can and will occur, because we know that water, between surface water and groundwater, there is a connection in different circumstances. We know that there is connection of water between groundwater basins, particularly when you get into the deeper groundwater aquifer systems. So we know that these conflicts are going to arise, and we want to make sure that the state is empowered to manage those using the existing water law framework. And we're really trying to figure out how can we focus on that and try and get away from talking about basin combination, which I think is at a much larger scale, and again is something that has been contentious, and it's also been done elsewhere in statute that we're not really trying to touch in this bill. Unfortunately, right now we have not found language that gets folks to a place where there's some level of comfort and agreement. So those conversations are ongoing. We'll see if we can come up with something. That's why there's no amendment put forward. But I did want to at least acknowledge those concerns up front, and that is something that I've heard and have been trying to address, and I'm really looking for that solution and hope that we can find something to bring forward to this committee for consideration. That's where things stand right now. So with that, very briefly, what the bill really does is it takes out, again, in our legislative declarations in NRS Chapter 533, the encouragement for the state engineer to consider the best available science, and then instead places that as a requirement within that chapter that the state engineer shall use the best available science in rendering decisions, and then lays out a definition. It's very hard to get into the nitty-gritty of a definition. We're trying to provide some level of guardrails, again, to provide some level of certainty, but also understanding that what would be considered and what the science is can vary dramatically from area to area, and still trying to provide the state engineer with some leeway to do that. And then, really the other key provisions are in Section 6 and Section 10 of the bill. And what we're trying to do here is say that existing rights or uses of groundwater are subject to other existing rights, and really, again, just trying to acknowledge that hydrological connection. So when determining if there is water available to appropriate, not just looking at is there water in that basin, but if somebody comes forward and says there's hydrologic connection here and we have to take that into account, and actually there might not be as much water available as we think, that this provides a clear basis to do that evaluation and make that determination. And again, just making clear that if somebody were to come forward and say, hey, there's a conflict with this existing right or use, but it's happening because of activity in a neighboring groundwater basin, or that there's some sort of groundwater surface water interaction, that's something that could be taken into consideration. So that is the high-level summary of the bill. And with that, I will take any questions that members of the committee have.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman Watts. Do we have any questions? I know there's been a lot of discussion on this, and with you and with other stakeholders ahead of time, so we might be questioned out. Senator Flores?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And by the way, the Senate is playing the Assembly today in baseball and softball, which is why I'm wearing my cap. Don't take that as a sign of disrespect. The game's immediately after this hearing. And I have hat hair, and I can't take it off anymore. I don't have a comb. That's the honest truth.
He's also trying to intimidate you.
Sending a message, Assembly member. Thank you. I've had an opportunity to meet with a lot of folk in the room, and one of the things that we were discussing, and I didn't have an opportunity to discuss with you, but I know it's a question that's already been posed to you. One of the things that was raised is that there's a fear that Section 6 and 10 are in conflict, that there may be two separate standards being set there. And if you could maybe walk through, and obviously the opposition has brought these issues to you already, but if you could walk me through that and kind of talk about that relationship between the two sections and why there is no conflict through your interpretation.
Thank you for that question, Senator. Howard Watts for the record. So Section 6 of the bill, particularly where in subsection 2, where the additional language is being proposed. So this is related to groundwater rights. And so, except as otherwise provided in subsection 10, where there is no unappropriated water in the proposed source of supply, where the groundwater has not been committed for use or reserved, or where its proposed use or change conflicts with existing rights. And so here's where, so we're trying to clarify and kind of add in that those rights are not just the rights within an individual groundwater basin, but could be in an adjoining basin, or they could be surface water rights if they're hydrologically connected. And so essentially that would have to be demonstrated and proven. But this is when an application is brought forward, we're trying to essentially say you have to evaluate that hydrological connection if evidence is brought forward to that effect, and consider that in making a determination. Again, we're trying to add that clarification in that conflict with existing rights. That's what the attempt was, to really focus on conflicts with existing rights and how we manage those. And so this is essentially trying to get at not appropriating water if it conflicts with existing rights, including if that conflict originates from a hydrologic connection outside of kind of what's being looked at. Again, if that conflict is related to a neighboring groundwater basin, or if it's related to what might otherwise legally be considered a different source of supply. And then Section 10. So one of the things I want to point out is Section 10 Sub 2, the existing statute. All underground waters within the boundaries of the state, and this is our groundwater law, belong to the public and subject to all existing rights to the use thereof, are subject to appropriation for beneficial use only under the laws of this state relating to the appropriation and use of water and not otherwise. And so we tried to use that as kind of a foundation to then add the same clarity around hydrological connection, so that any appropriation or use, and there's certainly concerns about use, but we wanted to make sure that, again, what this is trying to get at is if there's a conflict, we need to recognize we need to recognize that, whether it's within one basin or if it's occurring across basin boundaries, or whether that's with just groundwater or if it's with groundwater and surface water interaction. And so, any existing, any appropriation or use is subject to all existing rights to the use of that source. And then there's definitely been some conversation around the wording of if the state engineer finds the hydrologic connection exists. What I'll say is the intent there is, again, saying, okay, if you find that there is a conflict and that there is a hydrologic connection, that we are acknowledging that outside of just looking at one individual basin, or looking only at groundwater, or looking only at surface water. So that's the intent. I've definitely heard the concerns and around some of the language, and again, that's something that we've been in conversations about, trying to see if there's something that could provide some greater clarity and make sure that the potential conflicts that are with the language, not with the water, are addressed. That we could do so, and again, we're not there yet. Those conversations have been ongoing now.
Madam Chair, if I may ask on a separate section, again, also just to give credit to the folk that have taken a lot of time to sit down with me, and I appreciate the folk that have taken a lot of time to kind of educate me. I'm new to this committee, so I do appreciate those conversations. They're very helpful to me. And I appreciate your opening, Assembly Member, regarding the state engineer shall consider the best available science. That is a declaration. That's a standard now. It's a twofold question. It's simple. That's the kind of the standard and what's expected now. The only issue in any context when we talk about the best available science, there's always going to be conflict of what that really is. There's always going to be two opposing approaches, strategies. What's emerging science? What's verifiable, what isn't, what's creativity, what's scientifically based, and everybody's going to define that differently. If we just look at COVID, the country has demonstrated that we do not agree on what the best available science is, right? Depending who we're asking and what, even if all the experts in the room are in the room, there's going to be some discussion in that. So if you could just talk to us a little bit about that, and then second, that, and you said it again, but just to be fair to the folk that I spoke with, that you're not in any way expanding the state engineer's power, authority, please.
Thank you for that question, Senator. Howard Watts for the record. I'll start with the second question, and that's correct. So that is not the intent. The goal was to clarify the law. And again, I know that there are disagreements about certain authorities that the state engineer has exercised and whether they have the authority to do that. I do think that when I have talked about the specific things that I just discussed with the committee, much of the feedback I've gotten is that why would we try and put this into statute, because the state already has these authorities. You'll probably hear from some folks in testimony about other decisions, not this large one that was challenged, but other decisions where that authority has been exercised. And so there's concern, I think, that this is adding something in. Again, when I look at the potential impacts of things moving through the judicial branch, the ultimate outcome of whether the state engineer's decision is upheld or overturned, because again, there are due process and other questions that were raised and addressed in that decision. But my reading of it is that was actually going to strip back certain authorities that currently exist today. And so the goal is to clarify our statutes to ensure that doesn't happen and essentially keep us where we're at right now, not to make an expansion. So that's to your second point. To your first point around best available science, it's a great question, and I would say the practice is to use science in decision making. We can all I think agree that in general, when you're looking at it, you want it to be the best. You want it to be the most sound, and use that in consideration, because there can be competing analyses brought forward. And so the question always is, okay, it sounds like common sense, but how do you define that? And again, in my opinion, ultimately, the state engineer makes that determination when folks bring their case forward, either in support of something or protesting it, and it's subject to judicial review. And so that ultimately is how I think those questions really get addressed. But we're trying to make sure, and the reason that we're putting this in, and again, we already had some language to that effect in declaration. I think that it's important to codify it. And my concern is, if there's any question about it, the idea that we're not making decisions based on science, I don't think is appropriate when it comes to this area. So,
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you.
Thank you, Senator Flores. Senator Gokachia, did you have a question?
Yes, I've got a few, and probably some of these will be better answered by the state engineer, and I'm just going to kind of walk through this with the Assemblyman, but, I don't think anyone's challenging the fact that there are hydrologic connections, between, the surface and groundwater. I mean, that's a given. It's the conflicts, and to what extent. And I guess my concern is, until we actually get out there and can balance these over-appropriated, over-pumped basins, how do you determine what that conflict is?
Thank you for that question, Senator Goycochea. Howard Watts for the record. And, again, this is the goal of this is trying to find that sweet spot in balance with not being so overly prescriptive that it can't work in different areas or different scenarios, but also provide some clarity about what can be determined. I'll say at a high level, you and I agree that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think that there have already previously been instances when these conflicts have been developed and decisions have been made, or not developed, have been identified, and decisions have been made to manage and address those. And so this is envisioned as just making sure that same authority continues on. I think that as we do that work, we are going to find more. And as we undertake that exercise of trying to bring these over-appropriated and over-pumped basins back into balance, that is going to be a factor in there. But I think at a high level, these things can very well come up right now as we continue to evaluate different areas and folks bring science forward. I do think we will see a lot more of it. So I don't necessarily see it as something that I think there is value in trying to have a general policy put in place for how to address it now, understanding that there's going to be a lot more work that's going to have to be done, and it will ultimately, I think, reveal more instances where we're going to need to have some sort of process in place.
If I may, Madam Chair, and I agree with where you're coming from, Assemblyman. I guess, but I just need to reinforce we're talking about conflicts and how do you mitigate, and I hate to say that word, I don't want to drop it, how we address those conflicts. But the bottom line is we've got to deal with the start of the problem, which I feel is in 534, and the fact we're over appropriated and in many cases over pumped. And I think if you can bring that into a balance and heal it up, then I don't know if the problems and clearly the litigation we'd be facing would be near as strong as if we jump out and we establish a procedure, and I think we're headed to court, and I hate to see that. So I guess, you know, we got the horse, we got the cart. Which one's going to get in front? I really believe that, you know, our first task is to balance the groundwater basins. They were technically second in time. Surface water rights in 533. They're clearly priority water rights. They are being impacted. I don't think anyone will disagree with that. And so I think the best way for us to clean it up is address 534 and the over-appropriated basins. It's far simpler. It's an easier fix, even though it may be a little more draconian, and we've got some other legislation out there we're going to try and provide for a landing with, but we've got to curtail some groundwater pumping. We know that. You know it. I know it. Everybody in this room knows it. We're over-appropriated and we're over-pumped. So I guess I get concerned about, okay, the fix is going to be, okay, we're going to start combining over-appropriated, over-pumped basins. It just in my mind, it makes it more difficult. So, and you know my position. We've had these conversations.
Yes.
I don't think combining basins fixes the fact that both of them are over-pumped. We're in trouble.
Thank you for that, Senator. Howard Watts for the record. I appreciate that, and I do think that we generally agree that really is the overarching need. And, you know, I know that there's a range of policies looking to try and move us closer to that goal in a variety of different ways, at a variety of different points in the process, trying to make sure that we have some proactive measures so that we're not getting into even worse situations that we have to unwind, as well as trying to figure out when we are in those places how we can really get serious and take action to address that. So I think, in my mind, this is kind of part of the all of the above approach of making sure that as we're looking to do that if there's in that process of looking at it, we realize that, okay, well, there's also, in doing that, there's also impacts in these neighboring, to these neighboring rights or uses in other basins. Again, I think you and I both agree, it's pretty clear. If there's an impact to surface water, it's senior. And so the impact is going to be to groundwater rights. It's pretty clear. So this is really trying to make sure that as we work towards that goal that you spoke of, that we are kind of using that holistic science-based viewpoint. And again, definitely understand the concerns around the complexity and all the challenges that come with combining basins, and have really been trying to figure out how we can address that and figure out some statute that could get people a little bit more at ease around that. We just aren't there right now.
I appreciate you trying to bring it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, any further questions? Okay. With that, we'll have you step back. I don't think we'll have quite the quiet crowd we had during the last hearing. And I would invite everyone forward who'd like to testify in support on Assembly Bill 387 to please come forward to the table. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Kyle Roerink with the Great Basin Water Network, and we represent an organization that for 30 plus years we've been advocating and defending senior rights in the public interest and in a variety of arenas. And so, just wanted to give that background because there are many truths that we are here to discuss today. A major truth, hydrologic connectivity is real. Water rights know no borders. Another truth, junior rights holders are harming senior rights holders. Another truth, junior rights holders are harming the public interest. another truth. The junior rights holders don't want to be curtailed, and that's why we're seeing a lot of opposition today. It's a resistance to curtailment is the major issue here. What's another truth? You know, the state engineer is between a rock and a hard place right now, and we're trying to provide a little clarity for that. So, you know, I think the opponents of this bill want you to believe that white is black, sand is grass, and paper water is wet water. We are living in times of scarcity. This bill, especially as outlined in Section 10, is subject to existing rights. And to address scarcity, we must curtail to protect the most senior rights and to protect the public interest. So this is not about harming or taking rights. It is about, again, protecting the public interest. It is about cleaning up the mistakes of past regulators for over-appropriating. We're always here. We're always talking about how much paper water we have. I feel like I'm going to be a skeleton up here saying, we have more water on paper than we do in reality, but are we actually going to do anything about it? And that's what we are tasked here to do. And so, you know, we call upon you to support this bill for those very reasons. And, you know, just want to thank Assemblyman Watts. He's someone who indeed respects senior rights and indeed protects the public interest. And he's done a great job of hosting a variety of stakeholder inputs. It's not easy. We thank you all and appreciate your support.
My name is Benny Hodges. I would like to thank you for allowing me to testify here today. I'm testifying in support of AB 387. For over 30 years, I was the manager of the Pershing County Water Conservation District, which is the irrigation district in Lovelock, Nevada. Our source of water is Right Patch Reservoir, which is fed by the Humboldt River. We use surface water for flood irrigation. Since before 2017, Nevada revised statutes recognized surface water and groundwater as two separate statutes. 2017, the Nevada Legislature made a declaration that all waters of the state should be managed conjunctively, regardless of the source. Passage of AB 387 would give the state engineer the tools to conjunctively manage surface and groundwater. For example, how drought and overpumping is affecting Pershing County Water Conservation District farmers, A full allotment is 3 acre-feet per year in Pershing County District. The summary of the PCWCD allotment for the last 20 years, 3 years, we've had 0 allotment. 9 years, the allotment of 50% or less. 3 years, greater than 50%, but less than a full allotment. And 5 years, we've had a 100% allotment. That's a summary of 20 years. Now let's take a look at the groundwater pumpers allotment. Most underground agriculture rights in the Humboldt River Basin are 4 acre-feet per year. The summary of underground agriculture rights in the Humboldt River Basin for the last 20 years, for 20 years, they've had a 100% allotment of 4 acre-feet per year. Keep in mind that all surface water in the Humboldt River is senior in priority to all underground water. Passage of AB 387 would give the state engineer the tools to address this. AB 387 could also be used to address groundwater basin over-appropriation. Passage of AB 387 is simply the right thing to do. Thank you. Now, I'd like to make one other statement. When it comes to the surface water in the Humboldt River, it's just not the farmers in Pershing County. It's all surface water users on the Humboldt stream system. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. We are here today in strong support of AB 387. Mandating that the state engineer uses the best available science in making decisions regarding the management of surface and groundwater in Nevada will help ensure that decisions are based on accurate and reliable information. This is incredibly important as the entire state is dealing with a critical water crisis. Additionally, using sound scientific data and analysis can help us avoid unintended consequences or negative impacts on the environment, public health, and other important factors. Please support AB 387. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Pazina, members of the committee. Andy Belanger with the Southern Nevada Water Authority, here today in support of the first reprint of AB 387. We came into the session wanting to address three narrow issues: best available science, hydrologic connection, and joint management of basins. This bill addresses the first two, and I think it does it in a very narrow way. The third area, the joint management of basins, was addressed during the 2015 special session that Mr. Watts mentioned in his testimony. NRS 360-992 passed the Assembly overwhelmingly and the Senate unanimously in 2015 and made the following changes to state law. It allowed for expedited water right hearings on the Governor's Office of Economic Development projects through 2036. It limited the pool of protests and appeals on such projects to water right holders in jointly managed basins. It acknowledged in statute the state engineer's authority to jointly manage basins that, quote, share a unique and close hydrologic connection as a single source of supply, unquote. In fact, the state engineer's ability to jointly manage basins was used as the limiting factor to establish which basins could have expedited hearings and limited protest and appeals by only allowing it in jointly managed basins that were established by order before the effective date of that law. That language is already in statute. AB 387 does nothing related to joint management of basins. It doesn't need to. Furthermore, we heard testimony in the Assembly Committee that the state engineer granted water rights in this state for 60 years before the first basin map was even created. So any suggestion that the basin map is fixed and can't ever be changed by the office is inaccurate. I want to end by just quoting what Justice Hardesty said. He'd been pleading and begging the state engineer to adopt regulations to address the folklore and some of the issues that aren't written down in the office of the state engineer. And in November of 22, he provided an interview to the Nevada Independent, and he said, "We are dealing with a very old water law statute that has not been modified very many times. And as a consequence, there are some ambiguities and some uncertainties, and that instability in the water law is not healthy for an economy, like in our state, that is so dependent on a declining resource." So in closing, I would just say, there are things that need to be done to make the water law clearer, and we urge you to do those things in a narrow way, in a step-by-step way, so that our water law can be clear and can be positioned for the future. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Chris Mahana for the record, here on behalf of Churchill County, Truckee Carson Irrigation District, and Newlands Project water users who irrigate 80,000 acres. If I include my friend Benny, 120,000 acres. Fish and Wildlife Service in the state of Nevada are the largest water right holders in the Newlands Project. So the problem, best available science tells us the surface groundwater are a connected resource, but they've, for the most part, been managed separately, as most of us know. So here's the conundrum, folks. We've got a river, we've got a well right here pumping. These are senior rights, these are junior rights. Best available science tells us that this well is capturing that surface water. That's why best available science calls it a capture model. I submit to you, we can't look through this floor and know what's going on in the first floor, but we know something's going on. Same thing with groundwater. And if that diversion occurred on the surface without a surface water permit, the state engineer could issue a cease and desist order. They could arrest the person and fine them $10,000 a day. Furthermore, the stream could run completely dry. Well can continue to pump, take water from storage. When the Humboldt River comes back, the stream becomes less efficient because it's having to refill that storage. So the fallacy that a lot of people put forward is 533 is surface water, 534 is groundwater. We should keep doing that forever. Surface water was developed first. That's why it was developed, and then groundwater followed as the advent of deep turbine pumps and rural electrification. So what is the solution to this? Because those groundwater folks that are capturing water have a water right. Their livelihoods, economies have been derived around that. So you can't just take a draconian approach and turn them off. It's just not doable. The state engineers recognize that in Order 1329. So what's the answer? Conjunctive management. Other states have done it. Colorado tackled this 50 years ago in 1969. It's going to take a creative toolbox of solutions to fix the problem so we don't have to turn the groundwater users off. What does AB 387 does? It obviously defines best available science, requires the state engineer to follow it. It clarifies, it's an incremental step forward in Nevada water law to use best available science where a hydrologic connection exists that's sufficient to cause conflict. It applies both prospectively and retrospectively.
Sir, we've let you go on a little longer than most of our speakers, so if you can, in the next 30 seconds or so, we thank you very much.
So what AB 387 does not do, doesn't create super basins. It doesn't mean that groundwater rights have to be devalued or turned off, as some of the protestants will testify. We need a more surgical approach. You can't take a machete. It's like doing brain surgery with a machete when you need a scalpel. It has to be a combined conjunctive management policy. So what can you folks do? Follow best available science, vote with your conscience, do what's right for the state of Nevada. This shouldn't be a partisan political issue. It's water resources and protection of the prior appropriation doctrine. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And just because we do have a room full of people that I think most, it looks like on our list, do plan on testifying today, we're trying to keep everyone, keep your testimony somewhat limited, and we can always turn in additional testimony to the secretary as well, so it will still be on the record. And we thank all of you, and we really appreciate having everyone here today to share their thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jay Dixon for the record. I'm testifying in support of AB 387 on behalf of the Flying M Ranch. I manage their water rights. The Flying M Ranch has several thousand acre-feet of some of the most senior decreed rights on the Humboldt River. The Flying M believes the most effective way to protect existing economies in all industries and future economic developments in the Humboldt River region is to provide regulatory certainty by taking the following steps. Stop pretending that NRS chapters 533 and 534 were separated to manage surface and groundwater as separate sources, as that position defies logic and ignores science. For reasons Mr. Mahana just stated, I won't repeat them. Acknowledge and clarify, if necessary, that the state engineer already has the authority to protect existing rights. Nothing in our water right permit terms specifies that he is to protect existing rights only in certain areas. Rather, he must protect all existing rights. And finally, provide the authority, to the extent that it may not already exist, to regulate hydrographic basins or portions thereof based on demonstrative conflicts with priority rights regardless of the source. We hope the Nevada Legislature will do the right thing for all Nevada and take the necessary steps to clarify, that's all we're asking, the state engineer's authority to manage conjunctively while protecting and promoting continued sustainable development of our water resources by supporting AB 387, as we believe this is a step in the right direction. And I'll conclude with this. You know, several years ago, in a hearing room just like this all over the country, and regarding the opposition to this bill, cigarette companies showed up and claimed that cigarettes didn't cause cancer. That wasn't based on science. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Patrick Donnelly, Great Basin Director with the Center for Biological Diversity. We are in support of this bill, and we are grateful for Assemblyman Watts putting in the time and effort and creating the space for the development of this bill. There's really been a remarkable degree of collaboration that went into the development of this bill. You can see from the diversity of people who've been speaking here in favor of it, some of whom we plan on being in court against shortly here. But we have found common ground on trying to improve Nevada's water law in this way. And so I just want to emphasize that you've heard from some environmental groups, but this is not an environmental bill. This is a bill about best available science guiding management. And so I've been likened to say this bill doesn't really create winners and losers. It creates science-based management. And in some situations, science-based management will produce an outcome that is favorable for the environment and for my little pupfish friends who I like so much. And then in some cases, science-based management will produce results that are in favor of extractive use, agriculture, mining, who knows? That is situationally dependent, but the point here is we want science to guide that management decision-making. And that has to do with both the best available science standard, but also the geographic location of pumping and diversion of water and how that relates to surface water. And so I do want to emphasize that because in reality, the primary beneficiaries of this bill are senior water rights holders. And why does an environmental group care about senior water rights holders? Because senior water rights often protect high-quality environmental values, creeks, meadows, streams, springs. These are often associated with senior water rights. And so protecting senior water rights is an effective means to protecting the environment. So this is not about a single case or a single development. This is not about a wholesale revision of Nevada water law. It's just a clarification of the state engineer's existing authorities to manage based on science. And in fact, in our brief with the Nevada Supreme Court on the case we've been talking about today, we've documented 24 times where the Nevada state engineer has employed joint management of basins in the past 50 years across the state. So this has been happening. The bottom line is that right now, today, there's unsustainable pumping happening in Nevada, and without this bill, the state engineer's hands are going to be tied as to how they try to address it. And a group of us has made this good faith effort to find common ground and find a path forward. So no matter what happens today with this bill, that work is going to continue. The relationships, the communication that has been established is going to move forward. And so we urge your support of this bill, but we will say that this is not the end of this work moving forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Cynthia Moore, Coalition Coordinator for the Nevada Environmental Justice Coalition, and we're here in support of AB 387. And ditto to what has already been said, we urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
And thank you for the ditto.
Good afternoon, Chair Pazina, members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Laurel Saito, and I am the Nevada Water Strategy Director of the Nevada chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And we thank Assemblyman Watts for taking on this difficult task of bringing this bill forward and working with many people to get the bill to where it's at today. We're speaking in support of this bill. Nevada's groundwater aquifers provide drinking water and economic benefits for people, and also support groundwater-dependent ecosystems that rely on groundwater to maintain their ecological structure and function. Most of Nevada's rivers are groundwater-dependent, originating as groundwater seeps or springs, and they get additional inputs of groundwater along their length. Because of this connectivity of groundwater to surface water, it is possible for groundwater use in one hydrographic area to affect surface flows in another hydrographic area. AB 387 addresses this connectivity between surface water and groundwater by clarifying that the state engineer must consider whether applications for water rights in a specific hydrographic area could impact existing water rights or be detrimental to the public interest in any hydrologically connected surface water or groundwater. The bill also obligates the state engineer to consider the best available science in water decisions in the state. These changes will enable the state engineer to make science-informed decisions about Nevada's important water resources. We appreciate the efforts of Assemblyman Watts and his work with stakeholders to move the administration of water resources in a more sustainable direction, and we're ready to work with him and other stakeholders if needed to make the bill more effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera-Georgeson, Deputy Director of the Nevada Conservation League. We're here in support of AB 387. Our water resources are precious, and we must use the best available science when managing those resources. We'll ditto all the other comments that were made and urge the committee's support. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Isaac Hardy, representing Moapa Valley Water District. We are in full support, and ditto.
Thank you so much.
BPS, do we have anyone on the phone lines in support of Assembly Bill 387?
If you would like to testify in support of AB 387, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Good afternoon, committee. This is John Hatter. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, please continue.
I am the director of Great Basin Resource Watch, and we fully support this bill 387, and we urge you to do the same. It's time that we recognize that water does not respect artificial boundaries that we sometimes impose on them, and that the state engineer needs that authority to be able to act in this in conjunctive management fashion. So again, supporting all the comments that have been made in support of this bill, we urge you to support it as well. Thank you very much for your time. Bye now.
Thank you, Chair Brazina, for the opportunity to speak today with regards to AB 387. My name is Robert Kochi, and I'm a former deputy state engineer with 40-plus years of experience working in the field of Nevada water rights. Prior to giving my testimony in support of AB 387, I want to thank Assemblyman Watts for bringing this bill forward and his willingness to work with stakeholders. With regards to the term best available science, having worked for the state engineer for over 30 years, it is my opinion that the state engineer has always used best available science, and the inclusion of the term of best available science in statute simply sets the current standard of the state engineer into statute. With regards to cross-basin boundary impacts, you will hear opponents of AB 387 state that water rights in Nevada are issued and managed within the specific hydrographic basin of origin, and the relative priority of a water right has always been determined within the hydrographic basin. And furthermore, no water right holder would expect that their water rights would be curtailed in favor of a water right holder in a different hydrographic basin. What opponents neglect to acknowledge are the hundreds of thousands of acre feet of decreed surface and groundwater, and the 24,000 plus applications filed and acted upon by the state engineer prior to the creation of the 232 hydrographic basins by the state engineer and federal government in 1968. You also hear opponents say that the existing permit terms do not state that the permit is issued subject to all existing rights to the use of the source thereof. If the state engineer finds that a hydrologic connection exists, that is sufficient to cause a conflict with existing rights. That is a correct statement. The permit terms of every permit issued by the state engineer actually state, and I quote, "This permit is issued subject to existing rights." More importantly, what the permit terms do not say is that this permit is issued subject to existing rights located within the hydrographic basin of origin. There's no special protection or permission provided for in the terms of a permit to allow an existing junior water right holder to detrimentally impact senior water rights. Nevertheless, opponents of AB 387 want the legislature to believe that administrative boundary provides special protection and the ability of a junior water right to detrimentally impact senior priority rights simply because an administrative boundary based on geography of a basin, not the hydrology of the basin, was put on a map 60 plus years ago after the state engineer's office was created. That is simply not true. And finally, opponents of AB 387 will say that under current law and permit terms, a water right holder can go to court to enforce its permit terms and seek an injunction against a junior user pumping that impacts a senior water right holder.
Sir, if we can go ahead and have you wrap it up. You've gone about a minute longer than everyone else, so we just need you to wrap it up for us and turn in any additional testimony to the committee secretary.
Okay, just quick. That in accordance with the actions of the Nevada Legislature, the state engineer statutory mandated to protect senior water rights, not a court of law. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Caller, press *6 to unmute. Caller, press *6 to unmute. 080.
BPS, did we lose that caller?
One moment, Chair.
Chair, we're going to go ahead and move to the next caller. We're having issues with this particular caller.
Thank you. Next caller, please, in support of AB 387.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Olivia Tanager, and I'm the Environmental Justice Program Manager with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, here in support of Assembly Bill 387. The Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada was founded in 1994 by Nevada activists to build a more fair and just Nevada that puts people and planet first. We recognize that Nevada is the driest state in the nation, is in a water crisis, and thoughtful steps need to be taken to address the situation we find ourselves in. Communities across Nevada experience environmental issues differently, and water management is certainly no exception. This bill would play a role in ensuring that groundwater-dependent ecosystems remain intact, therefore protecting springs and ecosystems that Native communities in Nevada hold sacred and are at higher risk under existing state law. Protecting senior water rights users is an important aspect to water conservation and ecosystem protection in Nevada. I'll go ahead and submit the rest of my comments for brevity's sake, and so Senator Flores can get to his baseball game. But I appreciate you for taking the time to consider AB 387, and I urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, for echoing some of the other comments, and for wishing luck to the Senate team today. Do we have any other callers, BPS?
One moment, Chair.
So I appreciate you consider AB 387, and I urge your support. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Chair Pazina and members of the committee, my name is Linda Stout, a volunteer member of the Sierra Club's Legislative Committee and Conservation Chair for the Toyabe chapter. On behalf of the club, the world's largest environmental volunteer organization, and our more than 30,000 members and supporters statewide, I'm speaking in support of AB 387. We need clarity followed by action. The Humboldt River, the Lower White River flow system, the Death Valley flow system, and other regions stand to benefit from these important policy changes. For these reasons, and all the others that were mentioned today, we urge you to support this bill. Thank you so much for all the questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony. BPS, do we have any more callers?
The public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
All right, thank you so much. With that, we will close testimony in support of Assembly Bill 387, and we will open testimony in opposition to AB 387. Please come forward to the table if you'd like to testify in opposition, and thank you. And please do remember, it's always okay to echo comments if they have already been made. Obviously not for the first few seated, but after that.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Christina Erling. I am Vice President of Government Affairs for Nevada Gold Mines. We appreciate the opportunity to testify. Nevada Gold Mines opposes AB 387. The combined effect of Sections 6 and 10 is to amend Nevada water law to conjunctive use of ground and surface water in just a few words. It erases the 232 groundwater basins that have formed the basis of Nevada's groundwater law since 1968. AB 387 is premature and incomplete. Stakeholders should be taking the time necessary to understand the real situation for Nevada's water basins, the impacts to water users from potential law changes, and to properly evaluate what tools the state engineer will need and what mandates he must follow in transitioning into a whole new water law. We are willing to support the concept of conjunctive management if it is properly studied, implemented, and regulated. The legal distinction between groundwater versus surface water has been applied in Nevada water law for over a century. Massive investments have been made based on that law, and massive pieces of our economy have grown up around those investments. Any wholesale revision to Nevada water law must be done very carefully to avoid harming the state's economy and creating unconstitutional takings. Other states have implemented conjunctive management with some successes, but only because they worked for many years to first study and understand the issues for their particular water basins and design their state laws to include transition tools to meet the needs of all water users. We should learn from those successes and mistakes and find our own way. AB 387 is a disregard the consequences, let the court sort it out instrument. It's a one-size-fits-all approach to a state with regions that differ widely. We should take the time to work toward a Nevada solution. We urge our committees and our stakeholders to study this issue further in the interim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kyle Davis, and I appear today on behalf of the Nevada Mining Association. We are in opposition to AB 387. We appreciate the multiple conversations we have had with the bill sponsor during the 2021-2022 interim and throughout the session, as well as many of the stakeholders in the room today. Unfortunately, our association still has significant concerns with the bill language before you. We believe the Division of Water Resources currently has the authority to manage conflicts between water right holders in Nevada, regardless of the location of diversion of the respective rights, and this is evidenced by several recent actions by the division. To the extent that the goal of this bill is to clarify that authority, we do not feel that clarification is necessary, but the language contained in this bill presents other significant questions. By our read, the language in Section 6 introduces a new concept of managing water rights on a source-by-source basis, which could result in significantly more work for the state engineer. In addition, the language in Section 10 is unclear. It leaves the impression that any appropriation or use of groundwater is subject to all existing rights only if the state engineer finds the hydrologic connection sufficient to cause a conflict with existing rights. Even if we are to assume that this section would only apply in cases of conflict, this section is also unclear who has the requirement to prove such a hydrologic connection exists, and if so, whether it is sufficient to cause a conflict with existing rights. The Nevada Mining Association has appreciated being a part of these discussions and would welcome the opportunity to continue to be a part of future discussions. Many other Western states have already looked at the issue of conjunctive management and come up with some management protocols that could be useful for Nevada to learn from. Ultimately, the Nevada Mining Association is opposed to AB 387 because we are concerned about the uncertainty that the bill could introduce in Nevada's water law at a time when there is significant work to be done to understand how to better manage our state's water resources in a future that will likely be drier. Thank you for your time and consideration.
For the record, I'm Doug Busselman. I'm the Executive Vice President of Nevada Farm Bureau. Nevada Farm Bureau is opposed to AB 387. Nevada Farm Bureau policy states, we oppose the combining of established water basins and believe that management of individual basins lead to more precise stewardship of the water resources. The ability to see and measure what is happening under the ground is highly subjective. We see that basins are valuable as a boundary of reference for decisions in the decision-making process. Inflows to a basin can be measured and are estimated. Outflows from a basin can be measured and are estimated. The science applied to the basin and allocations approved based on that basin science. We are also concerned about using computer-generated models and broad brush applications of data to address site-specific decisions. Our contention is that if there are connections, there may be different degrees and may not be happening at all in some places within a basin. We appreciate being engaged with the conversations that have taken place in search of some way for our concerns to be addressed and something which would fit the policy positions which our farmer and rancher members have directed. In the course of those conversations, we've also come to anticipate the very likely door opened by Section 6 and Section 10 of AB 387 for conjunctive regulation in dealing with interactions of surface and underground water, doing so over multiple established basins. Farm Bureau policy also covers in-depth provisions relating to conjunctive regulation by the state engineer. In this regard, our policy expresses deep concern over operating conjunctive regulation on the basis of only legislative intent for directing conjunctive regulations and how these processes would be carried out. We believe that without strict clarification in the language of AB 387, that conjunctive regulations should not be implemented through this legislation without legislative guidance for parameters of such regulations. Thank you very much for your considerations.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is William Horn with Strategies 360 on behalf of Republic Services. We are in active litigation with the state engineer over issues that have been raised in this bill, and for these reasons, we are opposed to AB 387. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Leo Drozdoff, and I'm here today representing Nevada Cogeneration Associates Number 1, Nevada Cogeneration Associates Number 2, and the Truckee Meadows Water Authority. Sadly, all three entities are here today in opposition to AB 387. With regard to Nevada Cogeneration, they are also involved in the litigation that was mentioned. And you know, they support a letter that's been submitted to Nellis that Barrick and Republic and lots of others have supported. So they're in support of that letter. I won't really delve into that, only to say that you know, whether I agree with the district court's decision or whether Assemblyman Watts disagrees with the court's decision, it seems to us the proper course of action is to simply allow that decision to be heard, the appeal to play out, see what it says, and then, as the legislature and the executive branch have done for decades, come back and address what the Supreme Court says, one way or another. So in some regards, it's premature. With regard to the Truckee Meadows Water Authority, we're the second largest purveyor of water in the state. We service approximately 440 people in Reno, Sparks, and part of Washoe County. Tumwa has a great deal of surface water and groundwater. It utilizes conjunctive management on a daily basis to service those entities. It knows how difficult and tricky it is to rest basins and use groundwater and use surface water. And so the issue with AB 387, especially Section 6 and 10, is that there's really no definition to how that work is supposed to conclude. I do want to say on the record that we do support the use of best available science. We've made that clear in a letter that we've submitted to you, Chair Pizzina, and the committee. We'd encourage you to take a look at it, take a look at the comments with regard to historic practice with surface and groundwater, and also the unique interaction between surface water holders and rights and groundwater holder rights, because it's really not as clear-cut as perhaps you've heard. So thank you for your time.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Karen Peterson, Peterson. I'm an attorney, and I've represented Vidler Water Company for many years on water right matters in Nevada. Vidler Water Company owns surface and groundwater rights, and they own both senior and more junior water rights. So they're familiar with all sides of the issue here. Vidler is opposed to AB 387 for all the reasons set forth in the letter that we sent to you yesterday, and based on the confusion of the bill's purpose and actually common sense. We oppose all of the bill, but my comments are just centered on a few sections, which again are sections 6 and 10. My understanding, based on what I heard Assemblyman Watts say today, was the purpose of the bill was to, parts of the bill was to address conflicts. And the bill as amended was not authorizing the creation of super basins for joint management. But a lot of the supporters of the bill in their letters to you suggest that the bill authorizes conjunctive management. I didn't hear those words from the bill sponsor, and I also didn't hear that the conjunctive management legislative declaration that we have in statute right now was being moved over to the statutory side, like the best available science was. So there's certainly a lot of confusion as to what the language of the bill means or what the intent of the bill is. And again, if this bill is not to authorize conjunctive management or creation of super basins, then there's no need for sections 6 and 10. If the purpose of those sections is to protect senior existing rights or address conflicts, the bill is not needed. Most senior surface water rights were adjudicated by court decrees, and the state engineer does not possess judicial powers to enforce decrees or grant relief, such as an injunction. Section 10 allows the state engineer to determine if underground use impacts a senior surface water right, as opposed to the decree court making that determination and enforcing its decree. If the purpose of those sections is to protect senior groundwater rights or to address conflicts, existing law and the state engineer's permits do that. The law and permits say all water appropriated and water use is subject to existing rights. Our permit terms say nothing similar to the language in Section 10. And finally, our permits are water rights, are vested property rights, and they'd be altered and not allowed to be used under Section 10, not because there's an actual conflict, but because there may be a conflict sometime in the future with existing rights. You don't grant someone a business permit, allow them to start a business, put money into that business, and then tell them they can't operate that business because there may be a problem or a conflict somewhere in the future. And that's exactly what Section 10 does. All the entities opposed to this bill own water rights. For all water right holders, the words that you use are very important to us because we live by them every day and we're governed by them every day. So we would ask that you please carefully consider any amendments that you're making to existing water law that would impact existing water right holders. And I do want to comment on one section.
We are about a minute over where everyone else has been, so if you can wrap up in the next couple seconds. And please provide all of your testimony to the committee secretary, and we'll ensure it's on the record, and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Just the SNWA mentioned NRS 360.992. That's in the tax section of the NRS, and it applies to only certain specific economic development projects that have been approved by GOED or special economic authority. So it's not in the NRS chapter 533 or 534. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Good afternoon, Chair Pazina and committee members. My name is Emilia Cargill, C-A-R-G-I-L-L, and I am here on behalf of my employer, the Master Plan Community of Coyote Springs in Southern Nevada. Coyote Springs Investment has worked with other interested parties in an effort to reach an accord on an amendment that might be brought forth jointly. However, as we've heard earlier today, that was not successful. Therefore, we stand in opposition of AB 387. And I am going to say that we support not only the comments that were in our letter, of course, that I submitted, as well as the joint letter that was submitted, and everything that I have heard so far today, and certainly what Vidler and I know what Lincoln County Water District will be putting forth. And the only other comment that I would like to address, other than saying ditto, is that there may be a hydrological connection, but what's the spectrum of that hydrological connection? What if it's 200 miles away? What if it's 2 miles away? And the way that AB 387 is drafted, it doesn't address that, and it gives no parameters for it. So I will stand on all the other comments that I've submitted and say thank you for your time, and I appreciate it.
Good evening, Senate Committee. My name is Wade Polson. I'm the General Manager of Lincoln County Water District, and this chair is stable right here. It did not move on me, and I appreciate that. But we're testifying in opposition. You have a letter which Lincoln County Water District has been a part of, and we just want to say ditto to all of the other opposition. that has been testified this evening. One thing that I think the committee needs to understand, that just because there's connectivity in water doesn't necessarily mean that there's conflict in water. Connectivity does not mean conflict, but yet we do have conflict between surface and groundwater. Everybody understands that. We all know that in the water world. There are instances in the water world where you have people pumping in close proximity to surface water. That is a connectivity, and there's a conflict there. Then you have other people pumping that is several miles away. There might be connectivity, but that is not conflict. And so we heard that earlier, that do the right thing. I believe that this committee will do the right thing. I believe in our legislative process, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify in opposition today. Thank you very much.
We noticed you didn't go to the far chair this time.
I did not.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Neil Tomlinson from Hyperion Advisors, here representing LVWG. We oppose AB 387. We support the prior testimony in opposition, and would just add that the bill is not necessary for two reasons. First, the best available science standard is already contained within our existing law, and that resides at NRS 533.024, Section 1. And secondly, because with respect to the conflicts of existing rights, the state engineer already considers conflicts with existing rights. And that's not just limited within rights of the same basin. And that authority is given in NRS 533.370, Section 2. And for those reasons, we oppose the bill. Thank you. And in closing, go Senate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Morris, M-O-R-R-I-S, with Holland and Hart for the record. On behalf of Madison Companies, we're going to just ditto the points that were made in opposition, particularly those points relating to due process protections and unconstitutional takings for water rights holders. We do want to say that we appreciate Assemblyman Watts' approach to convening stakeholders and trying to find consensus language, and we hope we can support those efforts moving forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And of course, also for the Go Senate sentiments earlier, as the Assemblyman shakes his head. Do we have anyone else here in Carson City in opposition on AB 387 and BPS? If you could please check the phones for us.
If you would like to testify in opposition to AB 387, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller 833, you're unmuted.
Thank you. Sherry Whalen, TRI General Improvement District General Manager for the record, SHARIWHALEN. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee today. On behalf of Trade GID, I'd like to speak in opposition to AB 387 in its current form. As you may know, Trade GID is a local government created by Story County under NRS 318. We operate the water and wastewater utilities for the industrial and commercial businesses in the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center, which houses companies that are forefront on renewable and low carbon energy development. Trade GID holds surface water, groundwater, and effluent permits to serve current and future customers in our service area. Trade Center is one of the most significant economic engines in Nevada, and our water service is central to that development. We serve companies that recycle lithium batteries, build electric cars, use garbage to make jet fuel, and recycle cardboard into useful molded products to minimize reliance on plastic. No matter which green or other businesses we're serving, water is critical to their development and operation. When a prospective new development considers locating in the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center, one of the first questions they ask is about water. And this legislation increases uncertainty around the water rates permitted by the state engineer and banked with Trade GID for future development. We understand that the bill sponsor is interested in addressing basin delineation, conjunctive management of surface and groundwater, and best available science in the proposed legislation in response to a district court decision regarding the lower White River flow system. These are each important, complicated issues on their own, and we're extremely concerned that pushing through legislation of this magnitude in such a short period of time in reaction to litigation that is specific to just one region of the state could result in significant unintended consequences elsewhere. The challenges with passing such broad legislation are apparent as amendments are being introduced at the last moment, which doesn't provide stakeholders like us who are not full-time in Carson City enough time to digest and appropriately respond. As an alternative to this approach, we respectfully request that the committee consider allowing the litigation to play out with the Nevada Supreme Court before taking action to amend Chapter 533, and we request that an interim study be completed on how other states have handled conjunctive management issues, including recommendation on best practices for implementation, to be presented in the next legislative session. The potential negative impacts of AB 387 are great, and we're asking the committee to seriously explore the potential ramifications of the proposed legislation in your deliberation. As always, we're available to answer any questions you may have, and we're encouraging you all to come visit Tri-Center to see the important work that's being done there and how water plays a critical role. Again, thank you for the opportunity to provide information for your consideration today.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Martin Paris, Executive Director of the Nevada Cattlemen's Association. The Nevada Cattlemen's Association opposes AB 387 for all the reasons mentioned previously. We're very concerned that this bill will have many unintended consequences in regard to the doctrine of prior appropriation, a doctrine that many of Nevada's generational ranches were built and rely on. Further, to echo a previous comment made, until we address the overappropriation of water in half our state's basins, it's going to be hard to determine where conflicts even are, if that is in fact what this bill aims to do. We believe the vague nature of AB 387 will have drastic consequences across the state of Nevada and ask that you oppose the bill. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, BPS. Do we have any other callers in opposition on AB 387?
The public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
All right, that'll close out our testimony in opposition on AB 387, and we will open it up in neutral. Anyone who'd like to come testify in neutral, and we are looking at you, Mr. Sullivan, as well. All right, thank you. Please come to the front.
Hello, Alex Tanchek with Silver State Government Relations, here today speaking on behalf of Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe. The tribe is neutral on the measure, but would like to thank Assemblyman Watts for his work on this measure. Thank you.
Why don't we save the state engineer for last?
Chair Pizzina, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Jeff Fontaine, and I'm Executive Director of the Central Nevada Regional Water Authority and the Humboldt River Basin Water Authority. Both CNRWA and HRBWA represent different water users, and I am testifying in the neutral position on AB 387 on behalf of both authorities. CNRWA and HRBWA both have policies that were developed over the period of several months in involving a number of different stakeholders that states that conjunctive management of hydrologically connected water resources is generally appropriate and warranted. However, the policy also addresses other aspects of conjunctive management that are not necessarily reflected in AB 387. Like other stakeholders that you heard from today, we have worked diligently to try and reach consensus on language for AB 387 that is more aligned with both of those policies. And while HRBWA did not testify in support of AB 387, we certainly share Pershing County and Pershing County Water Conservation District's concerns and fully support the management of the hydrologically connected ground and surface waters in the Humboldt region. And in fact, this process is already underway with the completion of a capture model, which arguably meets the standards for best available science. And also, the state engineer has presented some different options for conjunctive management and initiated local stakeholder engagement. So with that, I just want to thank Assemblyman Watts for bringing this measure forward and really encouraging the different stakeholders to have an open and earnest discussion on this topic, which we will certainly be willing to continue if that is possible. And again, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on AB 387.
Adam Sullivan, for the record, Nevada State Engineer. I'm testifying neutral on this bill, and that's because as an agency, we will do what the legislature tells us to. However, I do feel obliged to mention that listening to the testimony, both in the testimony this evening, there's nothing in the testimony in support of this bill that I disagree with. And I make that point because there was a lot of dense, fact-based, detailed points made, and it all came in pretty quickly. But it's important in thinking about what this bill means and what's actually in it. In my view, this bill is consistent with what the state engineer is already directed to do with regard to using the best available science and considering the connectivity and potential for conflict between surface and groundwater. However, because this authority, which I think, which I view as implicit authority in state law, has increasingly been questioned, I do see the necessity in the value in making the intent of the legislature clear. Our job as a state agency is to be objective and science-based, and to make sound decisions that are as accurate as we can make them. The recognition of hydrologic realities has to be central to our decision making. This bill, I do see this as being protective of existing water law, of prior appropriation. It's protective of senior rights. I also see it as supporting the work that we do as the Division of Water Resources. When it comes to addressing potential conflict, we do not take it lightly. We recognize that implementing water law can be harsh. It can have significant impacts on people and communities that rely upon water supply. We recognize the importance of public engagement in what we do and the importance of not taking actions that would unduly cause harm to water users, any water users. Solutions to our problems aren't easy, but I guess my concluding point or my sentiment is that AB 387 is a valuable step forward to responsible and forward-looking water management in Nevada.
Thank you. I'm guessing we'll probably have some questions for you because this bill you'll be a large part of the impacts with this bill. Do we have any questions? Okay, Senator Gokachia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and given the hour, I'll be as brief as I can. But State Engineer Sullivan, I guess, and I hate to go back to the same issue, but clearly half of our basins are over-appropriated, half of those are over-pumped. Wouldn't it be beneficial in easing conflicts if we brought those basins back into alliance with their perennial yield? I mean, maybe we should start looking at the easiest fix first, and let's bring those basins back into alignment. Now we're saying, okay, well, we're going to talk about conflicts, and especially when you get into the areas of the deep carbonate flows, it's going to get tougher and tougher, and the data is going to get harder and harder to come by and more expensive. So in my simple mind, it just seems like let's take the easiest fix, which is addressing the over-appropriation and over-pumping of these basins, first and foremost. And then once we have this flattened out and we've kind of established, and I hate to get into flattened out the water table, perennial yield, call it what you want, when we've kind of fixed that, and that's not going to be an easy fix. It's going to take a long time and a lot of money to fix that, and a lot of data to find out where we're at. But isn't that better than, okay, let's go ahead and put another section in water law, and all due respect to my colleague, we're just going to open this up and say, okay, folks, look, we've got problems. So now we're going to start combining groundwater basins and establish that there is true hydrologic connections between these sources. We know there is. And again, whether we talk surface water, alluvial, or the deep carbonate, these issues have to be addressed. But I think we're going to have to take off at a slow pace. Let's try and fix the easy first, or the easiest, start taking the easiest pieces apart. Clearly, there's nothing in 387 that you need to start addressing the issues of overappropriation and overpumping.
Adam Sullivan, for the record. I appreciate the comment. In my view, I don't see that as a goal that's exclusive or not consistent with what's proposed here in AB 387. And I think I agree. We have the authority and the responsibility to address conflict, but we also need to recognize that conflict may transcend what's groundwater sources and surface water sources, and I think that needs to be clear.
Thank you, and again, because this has been a long hearing late, but again, I guess I'm just looking forward, and let's not expand the problem. Let's address what we can fix quickly and easily, or a little simpler, without. When we get into start talking about these true deep connections and water chemistry and what's the signature on that water, and all of a sudden, we pull samples out of the White River flow system and say, hey, this water could have come from Montana, Utah, Idaho. I think we need to clean it up at home a little better first, and I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Would you like to respond, or?
Adam Sullivan, for the record. One quick comment that I don't disagree that taking the simpler approach first, that getting the most bang for the buck, so to speak, is a good approach. But again, I don't see AB 387 as being exclusive or a problem or a barrier to taking that approach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that, Adam.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Mr. Sullivan? Okay. With that, you can go ahead and step back from the table. Anyone else in neutral on AB 387? BPS, do we have anyone on the phones?
The public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
Thank you so much. Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, for the record, Howard Watts. I'll try and keep it brief so that we can all go down to the softball field and the assembly can be extremely victorious. I'll just say, again, first of all, I appreciate, again, all the comments that came forward. And, there's been a lot of conversation. I guess one of the things that I'll say about that is just to step back on some of the process. The Public Lands Subcommittee was tasked with undertaking a study of water conservation issues. We held a meeting in Boulder City focused specifically on water, which is where this and some other issues were brought forward, and that kind of led to the introduction of this bill. We talked about water at almost every meeting. Public Lands met in communities all across the state of Nevada. We met in Ely. We met at Pyramid Lake. So a lot of work did go into trying to hear from stakeholders all across the state about this issue and other issues leading up to the introduction of the legislation. So I want to make that clear, and then we've tried to have a range of things, understanding that I also can only be in so many places at once. So there's been conversations that I've been in on, conversations that others have had, to really try and make sure that we're getting as much input as possible. And my commitment, no matter what happens, is to continue these conversations. This has been a little bit more of a classic water hearing, long, a bit contentious. But we've actually, I think we've made a lot of progress, and we've actually had more conversation, more collaboration on trying to tackle some of these problems. I'm confident that we are going to make some significant progress overall coming out of this legislative session, and we are going to need to continue to do more. Another thing I want to address is in the conversations about this not being necessary, we can sit back and we can wait and see what courts decide. A couple things that I want to bring up. One is that there's always ongoing litigation about water issues. And two is that I feel that it is important for us to not just sit back and let the courts dictate what the authority of the state is, but that the legislature is proactive in addressing that. We have a very strong water law. We're better positioned than many others, and it is not my intention to undermine it, but to improve it. As others have noted, there are other places that are further down the road in addressing some of these conjunctive management issues and these hydrological connection issues, and so I think it's important that we do so, especially when we see potentially a court stepping in and scaling back some of the options that would be available to the state. So that is why I believe it's important to bring this forward and to have these conversations and to try and figure out a path forward that, again, strengthens the law by recognizing and incorporating science and not limiting ourselves to what I think everyone, whether they're in support or opposition, knows are legal fictions in terms of treating groundwater and surface water as if they have no connection at all, or trying to pretend that all water stops at the boundaries of a basin on a map. So that is ultimately what we're trying to address. Again, the conversations will continue. I appreciate all of your time and attention to this bill today. Thank you. I do ask for your support, even though I have to say go Assembly.
Assemblyman, thank you. One last comment, I think, is just we appreciate all of the hard work that you've done bringing the stakeholders together, and we're looking forward to seeing any conversations that may materialize and continue to happen over the coming week, and we look forward to seeing you back. Thank you very much. All right, with that, we'll move to our final order of business, which is public comment. Just a reminder, that should not have anything to do with the bills we've discussed here today. You are limited to 2 minutes for public comment. Do we have anyone in Carson City? Seeing no one coming to the front, BPS, anyone on the phones who'd like to make public comment?
The public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
Thank you so much. We will be back here Tuesday at 3:30 p.m. with 3 different bill hearings. We wish everyone a very happy Mother's Day, a wonderful weekend. We thank you for being here today. With that, go Senate, and Natural Resources is adjourned.